originalists use when the Constitution's original meaning doesn't exist. So for example, let's say that the cruel and unusual punishment clause, which is counterintuitive, I don't think this is the case, there was no consensus about what cruel meant. Instead, if you would have asked 100 average Americans what does cruel mean, you would have gotten something like 100 different answers. There was no conventional or publicly understood meaning of that word cruel. And instead, assume that there was a consensus on practices. There was a consensus that these 10 practices, the thumb screw, the rack, I don't think the gruesome, I guess drawing and quartering was the most gruesome I can think of, that there was a consensus that these 10 practices were outlawed. And as I said, we know that government's good at coming up with new and unconventional punishments. And so if the original meaning is limited to just outlawing those 10 practices, then originalism is in trouble. But it's not. What induced principle originalism does is it says, what is the rule, standard, or principle that fits those practices for which there was a convention? These practices are prohibited, these practices are permitted, these practices are required, and then take that rule, standard, or principle that you induce from those practices and apply it to the new situation, apply it to the new punishment. And so let's say that you induce the principle of disproportionate punishment, then the judge should not have any, in principle, reason not to be able to rule on whether that new punishment is cruel and unusual. Third, indeterminate and underdeterminate original meaning. When the Constitution's original meaning does not determine the outcome of the case, we say that the constitutional meaning is indeterminate or underdetermined. And there are two modes in originalist interpretation, and you can see it on the chart that I handed out. I think it's on the right-hand side. If the Constitution's original meaning is determinate, that means that it gives a right answer to a particular case. Can Congress, through its Commerce Clause power, regulate transportation of goods for commercial use across state lines and trains? The answer is clearly yes. So the original meaning gives a determinate answer to that legal question. But there are a lot of questions for which the Constitution's original meaning does not give a determinate answer. How about this? Can Congress, using the original meaning of the Commerce Clause, regulate transactions over the internet? I think that's indeterminate. I don't think there is one right answer. I don't think the original meaning gives us an answer to that question. I think part of it depends on how you characterize the internet. Is the internet just a collection of photons of light and electrons crossing state lines on fiber optic cables or copper wires? Or is the internet something like a mechanism for transacting business? I think that's an open question. And when the Constitution's original meaning is indeterminate, like I'm suggesting it is in that situation, then Congress or the President, the elected branches, have the authority to construct constitutional meaning. And what this means is that in all those many areas where the Constitution's original meaning is indeterminate, and especially is likely to be the case when you're faced with a new technology, like the internet, then Congress, pursuant to its electoral power, can respond as the situation deems at that time. So we're not time-bound by the original meaning of the Commerce Clause. Instead, Congress has, today, discretion how to answer the question. And there's lots of examples that I could give, and I'm happy to talk about that in the question and comment part. 4, Article 1 in state police power. Congress, through Article 1, is given a significant amount of legislative power. And the states, under our theory of government, retain a significant portion of what's called state police power. Congress and the states can regulate on a lot of subjects as they see fit to meet current circumstances. So for all those situations, and there are so many it's hard to think of examples, for all those situations where a legislative response is permitted under Article 1 of the state police power, then there's no challenge of change at all. We just go to representatives and encourage them to pass legislation that meets the current circumstances. One example I thought of is GLUPA, Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act. You might have studied that in Property 1, you might study that in Common Law 2. The Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act was passed for a couple of reasons. One of the reasons was that you had churches with nice historic buildings in downtown areas, for example, and the churches maybe had an increase in membership, and they wanted to expand their building, and then something happened that hadn't happened in the past, or at least not so much. The local zoning board would designate the church as a historic landmark. What that means is you can't alter your structure without the zoning board's permission, and even if you get permission, it costs you a lot of money, which a lot of churches don't have. And so in response to that new circumstance, new because zoning is fairly new, and new because zoning boards really hadn't hindered religious bodies in this way in the past, Congress passed RLUIPA under its Article 1 powers, and I guess it's Section 5 powers as well. So it's a clear example of using legislative power to respond to a new circumstance consistent with the Constitution's original meaning. Article 5. Of course, the Constitution, Article 5, contains within itself the ability to change the Constitution's original meaning. We don't like the way the Constitution is acting or permits us or doesn't permit us to do something in one context. We go through Article 5. A clear example, I think, would be the 19th Amendment. By 1920, the Americans had understood that the status of women required women to have the right to vote. So what did? We engaged in a national debate, we came to a consensus, and we passed an amendment, and there's never been any problem since then. And there are many areas in which that's happened. One of the criticisms of Article 5 is that it's too hard. It's too hard to pass constitutional amendments, especially in today's fragmented society where Americans don't agree on a lot of things. I think there's truth to that. For example, the flag burning amendment. Polls show, and have shown for about 20 years now, that Americans overwhelmingly support an amendment to the Constitution that would ban flag burning. But we still don't have it. In fact, it's failed every time it's been introduced in Congress, which is pretty frequently. And so the argument would go that if we can't pass a flag burning amendment where 80% plus of Americans want it, then amendments through Article 5 really aren't a viable possibility. I think there's also a counterside to that. It has 2 points. One is kind of flippant, which is that if we can pass an amendment outlawing the use, sale, and transportation of alcohol, and then an amendment for permitting the use, sale, and transportation of alcohol, then we can pass amendments that we really care about. And the second point is less flippant. It's that one of the reasons why we don't have Article 5 amendments anymore is because the Supreme Court has de facto created amendments through non-originalist precedent. So a good example is during the New Deal. Roosevelt, during his first New Deal, had a number of his key legislative components that were struck down by the Supreme Court on Commerce Clause grounds, on non-delegation grounds, and other provisions. In response to that, Roosevelt's advisors said, you're overwhelmingly popular on the federal and state level. You've got an overwhelming majority in both houses of Congress. You could easily pass an amendment that would create for a more broadly worded Commerce Clause. Roosevelt declined that opportunity and instead pushed through, as we know, a court-packing plan, which changed membership of the Supreme Court, which led to what are de facto amendments to the Constitution's original meaning in those New Deal precedents. And what they did is they deprived America, of the opportunity to have a debate. Do we want a broader Commerce Clause or not? And it's in similar situations like that where the court has passed non-originalist precedents or issued non-originalist precedents that took away the popular pressure to go through the Article 5 process. So I think, in fact, the existence of non-originalist precedent is the prime reason why Article 5 isn't utilized much anymore. Which takes me to the last mechanism, non-originalist precedent. My understanding of originalism, which is really controversial, is that originalism has a place for some non-originalist precedent. And I think that's the case because Article 3, judicial power, which federal judges exercise, requires federal judges to give significant respect to non-originalist precedent. And that means that some non-originalist precedent should not be overruled. I think a good example would be the legal tender cases. So the legal tender cases were the series of cases after the Civil War where the Supreme Court, I think contrary to the original meaning, said that Congress doesn't have to just coin metallic money. Instead, Congress can print money, and that's consistent with Congress's power to coin money. Now, anybody today who wanted to overturn the legal tender cases, make the U.S. dollar to destabilize the U.S. dollar in doing so, I think would be mistaken. Even though the legal tender cases are a non-original series of precedents, they're firmly rooted. It's consistent with the rule of law, and I think they make good public policy sense. So those non-originalist precedents should be retained. Now, how's that relate to the challenge of change? It relates to the challenge of change because most, or a large percentage of non-originalist precedents were issued by a Supreme Court in response to perceived changing conditions. And let's go back to the New Deal. New Deal opinions with a broad interpretation of the Commerce Clause, a broad interpretation of the taxing and spending power, a narrow understanding of the non-delegation doctrine, repeatedly referred to the new situation that was facing the country. We're an industrialized country, we're an urban country, our economy is interdependent in a way it wasn't before. So in other words, those non-originalist precedents were justified by the changing circumstances of the time. So to the extent that originalism preserves those non-originalist precedents, it allows originalism to meet those changing circumstances. Those are the 6 mechanisms. How does that meet the challenge of change? Using these 6 tools, originalism is able to get with the times, so to speak, or at least enough. In other words, I think there are probably many situations where originalism does not get with the times, but these 6 mechanisms allow originalism to do that well enough so that originalism is not counted out as a viable interpretive methodology. And I think what I've done is a second thing as well. What I've done is I've shifted the burden. So in my review of critics of originalism who say that originalism can't get with the times, what I saw are vague, general criticisms. But rarely did I see, almost never did I see, a concrete criticism. The original meaning says X, the current times demand not X, so therefore originalism fails. And the burden, I think, is on non-originalist critics of originalism to point to specific circumstances where that is the case. And those are few and far between. The last thing I want to do is I want to say that originalism retains what I call critical bite. Critical bite is the idea that an interpretive methodology is principled. It's not flabby. It's not whatever we think is right today. That instead there are situations where the original meaning is going to lead to conclusions that are inconsistent with our constitutional practice. So here's an example. We recently had a vigorous debate still going on in the courts and in the broader public about whether the individual mandate in the Healthcare Reform Act is constitutional, whether Congress has the Commerce Clause power to require all Americans to get a certain type of health insurance. The original meaning, I think, would clearly count out that congressional power. And what we're doing is we're seeing that originalism still retains, I think, critical bite to say that in this very important piece of legislation, the central component, the individual mandate, is unconstitutional. And so originalism retains that critical stance. I think there's a second piece of evidence as to why originalism maintains its critical stance. In other words, it's a principled methodology. And that's because of the proliferation of what I call modified originalisms. So there's a cottage industry right now of folks like Jack Balkin and Yale, who at one time were strong critics of originalism, but now have jumped on the originalist bandwagon and are saying things like, I'm an originalist too, although my original is just a little bit different. And the key component to what I call these modified originalisms is something like this. So Balkin says, his originalism avoids chaining ourselves to the original understanding that will leave our Constitution insufficiently flexible and adaptable. What's that? That's an originalism, in his mind, that's sufficient to meet the challenge of change. And he wants to have a lot of flexibility to meet that challenge. And so what Balkin is perceiving is that standard originalism, regular originalism, whatever his originalism is not sufficiently flexible. In other words, it retains critical bite. And that's a little bit too much for Balkin. So, can originalism get with the times? I think the answer is clearly yes, through those 6 mechanisms. Does originalism lose its critical bite through those 6 mechanisms? I think the answer is no. That it still is principled enough that you can call it originalism. So thank you, and I'm looking forward to Professor Oesterle's comments.
I'm just not going to use this. I dabble in con law because I have to, not because I want to. I don't respect the court much, and I think that's why I'm up here, I'm not sure. I don't idolize the Supreme Court. And I dabble in con law because I've been on law faculties for 30 years, and con law is the featured topic in all faculty symposiums, seminars, and everything. And so I have to listen to it because I have to go, because I want to participate in the intellectual debate. So over the years, I've really been stunned at how much of this stuff I've read. So when I read Professor Strang's paper, which is kind of interesting, I always go through the footnotes, and it's amazing how much of the stuff I've had to read over the years. And it reminded me of the sorry state of the common law stuff. It's amazing you get paid for writing this stuff. I've read Akil Barr's stuff. Gee, Merry Christmas, how he makes any money off that stuff, I still am amazed. It's a good gig, but, and Dworkin's stuff and all this stuff, I've read all this stuff. I've had to, not because I wanted to. So I know a little bit about it because I have to know a little bit about it. Let me talk a little bit about originalism real quickly, the history of the current debate, and then some of my problems with Professor Strang's paper. and again, coming from the outside, as somebody who